Thank you all for joining us today for Prison Education Programs, the Power of Education. We want to take a moment to thank our 2024 annual conference platinum sponsor, Cyberbit, for sponsoring today's event. Cyberbit provides the world-leading cyber range, delivering hyper-realistic cyber attack simulations that maximize the skills of information security teams and students. To learn more about Cyberbit, visit cyberbit.com. Next. Hi, I'm Carmen Scott, Assistant Director for Substantive Change at MSCHE.
Hello, everyone. I am Carmela Smith, Vice President for Accreditation Services at the Middle States.
Next slide.
Hello, everyone. Stan Andrees. I'm the Executive Director from Prison Cells, a PhD, and also an Assistant Professor at Howard University College of Medicine. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Callahan. I'm Dean of the Bard Prison Initiative, and I came to this work through the faculty of Bard College, where I was in the anthropology program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Belinda Wheeler, Senior Program Associate at the Vera Institute of Justice. Vera is the approved technical assistance provider by the U.S. Department of Education we were for Second Chance Pell and now for Pell Grant reinstatement. Great to have you here today.
Questions can be submitted throughout this presentation in the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. Time at the end has been allotted for Q&A. Now I will turn over to Meg to get started on today's presentation.
Thank you, Carmen. So again, my name is Megan Callahan, and I wanted to start by commenting on some terminology that all three of us are going to be using as we talk through our slides. So prison education program, of course, can be a general descriptor, but it also is a technical term. This is what the Department of Education is using to designate college and prison programs that complete the process and are authorized to disperse federal financial aid in an ongoing way. So we will be talking about PEPs in that way, meaning the process or the status of being able to disperse federal funds. And we will also separately be talking about the work of college and prison. So college and prison, of course, predated Pell entirely and then has been through multiple cycles of Pell being made eligible and ineligible and eligible to people in prison. So we are going to be talking not just about PEP status, but also about the work of college and prison. I'm going to be focusing mostly on the work of college and prison, and my colleagues are going to be providing more information about the Department of Ed and the process of becoming a PEP. And we can move to the next slide, please. So here are some principles to start with. And the main thing is just that we think it's really important that colleges and college and prison should reflect the quality, diversity, and character of colleges and universities outside of prison, which should be very reassuring for anybody who is new to this field. It's actually the most important thing to do is to figure out how to take what you already know, your expertise, the thing that your college or university is already doing, and bring it to life inside a different institutional context. We want to make sure that college and prison doesn't separate and become its own homogeneous prison education thing, separate from actual colleges and universities outside of prison. So elements of this are that each of the colleges holds really responsibility for academic decision-making. And I say this knowing that we are operating in a context where we actually have little to no authority and could be asked to leave really at any point. But still, even within that context where we are there as that the Department of Corrections is hosting us, we have to take seriously our own responsibility for academic decision-making. We also really, of course, need to take students seriously as members of the college, and this would show up in a number of ways, including, as students and alumni start shaping the college, but also from the very outset, making sure that students are recognized as students and not as kind of recipients of outreach or as charity or whatever else it might be. And then finally, just being academically ambitious and then making sure that we provide students with the resources that they need to succeed. So the same things that you're already doing outside of prison, making sure that you maintain that consistency as much as possible inside. Next slide, please. If you are just getting started, you have a million questions and things to think about. So just to talk through a little bit of that now. One thing is to look within your college or university to consider how you might begin to build. So you might start by looking at who is already very interested in being part of this, how you can build institutional support for the work. And we really recommend starting small and planning on growing carefully over time. So a lot of colleges start with a faculty lecture series inside a prison, or maybe courses that don't confer credit at the very outset. But even if that's how you're starting, you want to make sure that you're situating your college and prison program in such a way that you will be able to grow to where you want to get, which presumably would be a degree granting college program. So thinking about that at the outset is very important in terms of where the college and prison program is located within your institution. And thinking about at the point where you're conferring credit and then degrees, you're going to need some role specialization. So you don't want every single faculty member who's going in to teach to have to become experts in navigating prison bureaucracy or liaising with the prison administration. You're going to need some kind of administrative role to take that on. And of course, it can be a member of the faculty. Most of Bard's administrative positions are held by members of the faculty. But you need somebody who's going to make sure that they can build the relationship with the Department of Corrections over time, that they are setting up the logistical administrative structure of the college and prison program. Different faculty are not going to be equally good at that, and really shouldn't. You don't want them to have to try to learn it. You want them to be able to go in, teach their courses as faculty to students without getting too bogged down in the rest of it. In terms of time and academic trajectory, so as you're looking internally at what's going on within your college or university, presumably you're also looking around at the prisons where you might teach. So looking at prisons within commuting distance, one of the things that you'd want to initially kind of start mapping out is how big are these prisons, how many people are incarcerated there, and also on average, how long will they be there? So one of the easy ways of starting to get some information about that is to look and see whether the prison is classified as maximum security, medium security, minimum security. People who are incarcerated at maximum security prison will probably be at that prison for longer before they're released than somebody at a minimum. So that's going to affect how you imagine your college and structure the possible degree trajectories that students might take. At a maximum security prison, students are more likely to be able to complete a full bachelor's degree before they go home. At a minimum security prison, you would want to really map out from the very outset how students will finish after they go home, because they probably won't be able to finish while they are in prison. And for anybody who's also considering jails, this would be a factor as well. So in a jail, you would have the most fluctuation and presumably the least amount of reliable time with any of your students. However, there are a number of colleges who have successful programs that incorporate coursework within jails. So if this is something that you're interested in, you could look at the work being done by UMass Amherst or Columbia or Georgetown, to name a few. And then the final thing here is just to reiterate that we really recommend not trying to do everything at once, but starting small and building over time. And this is, I'm going to now kind of turn to talking a little bit about how BARD does this work, but with the caveat that we've been doing this for 25 years. So what I'm describing is where we are now and not where we started. And this shouldn't be a kind of understood as a model for how to start, but as some goals of what you might grow to over time. And I'll take the next slide, please. So to start with, our academic structure. So we are Bard College, so we're offering Bard courses, Bard credits, Bard degrees. We are full-time and in person. And I want to pause on that last bit about being in person. If I can make one recommendation to everybody who might be listening, if you have any opportunity to commit your college or university to doing college and prison in person as opposed to remote, please take that opportunity. It is a vast difference, as we learned during COVID. And that would be my highest recommendation for the day. If possible, do college in person, in prison. BARD has a liberal arts curriculum, so we have a liberal arts curriculum within BPI, and of course, that's inclusive of math and sciences. And I'll take the next slide. So we like to think about what we are communicating about the college at every point of interaction with prospective students and then incoming students. And one of the things that we are doing is trying to convey what the college is, what the college cares about, and what the college does not care about, and most particularly what the college does not care about. So the college should be recognizably distinct from the institution of the prison. And BPI is not looking at, for example, prison disciplinary records, but also we don't look at prior educational institutional records either. The state of New York does require that anybody applying to college in prison hold either a high school diploma or a high school equivalency. So we do know that about prospective students. Most BPI students have a high school equivalency. But we're not asking for academic records beyond that. We're not asking for letters of reference. We're not asking for transcripts, and we aren't administering standardized testing. We really think that those kinds of records are not a great indicator about how somebody will do at BARD. And also we want to give students a chance to have an experience in the classroom that might be different from their prior educational experiences. Another thing that we want to communicate with students about early on is how financial aid will affect their admission and enrollment with the college. So because BARD has been building financial sustainability over time, we have the luxury or the option of making admission need blind, which means that a student who cannot draw Pell, for example, because they are not a citizen or eligible non-citizen, does not have to, that doesn't change their likelihood of being admitted, and it doesn't affect their enrollment once they're in. So we make this pretty clear up front. I also recognize that we're in a privileged position to be able to offer scholarships to cover tuition for students who are not going to draw financial aid. And so if your college is at a point where you can't do that, you know, I would suggest trying to make it a goal over time, but also the most important thing is just being very clear in communicating with prospective students up front about how financial aid will affect their enrollment. And then finally, you know, basically you want to go through every area of communication that you would be always communicating to any student and think about how do you do that in this context through student handbooks, through orientations, through ongoing advising. And all of those things should convey not just information, but also the level of the commitment that the college is making to students, and also that the commitment that the college is asking of students. And as long as you're taking your responsibility really seriously as an institution to deliver on your promises, you should not hesitate to ask a lot of students. May I have the next slide? So a lot of people have questions about remedial coursework, and college and prison programs take a variety of approaches to remedial coursework, just as colleges do outside of prison. There are college and prison programs that require students to take non-credit bearing courses before they start credit bearing courses or into a degree program, which is totally fine. Bard's approach is what is sometimes termed integrated remediation, which is that we teach the foundational skills as part of our first year credit bearing coursework. So we have to pay particular attention to what students are learning in their first year, but those courses are designed for everyone, not specifically for students who we think might be struggling. And like on the main campus of Bard outside of prison, students start with a lot of general required classes, taking classes across a lot of different subject areas within the liberal arts, and then have an opportunity over time to become more specialized. And this is a general kind of point of principle, which is that we don't start from the point of thinking, like, how would we do education? What courses would we offer for people in prison? Instead, we think, okay, what does the college do? And then how do we do that as consistently as possible in this other context? So of course, there are adaptations that we make. An obvious one is equipment. There's a lot of equipment used on the campus outside of prison that we can't bring into the prison. But we always start from the point of how do we make the educational experience as consistent as possible? And then we make adaptations in order to get to that goal. And next slide, please. Okay, so of course, a huge part of all of this is the academic services and resources that students have available to them in order to be enrolled in these courses and to succeed in them. So we have peer tutoring, we have academic advising. Because I mentioned earlier that I think it's really important that college and prison happen in person, I wanted to recognize that we're not anti-technology. We are, BPI, Bard College, has built computer labs in each of the prisons where we operate. We're in 7 prisons in New York. And we want students to, be fully fluent and comfortable using Microsoft Word, Excel, LaTeX if they're a math student, JSTOR if they're doing research. We want to, as much as possible, use technology as an educational tool. We just don't want to use technology to replace in-person teaching. And I'll go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so reentry and alumni engagement. BPI for many years didn't have a separate component that was called reentry or alumni engagement. As students started to be released from prison, BPI administrators, staff worked with them one-on-one, and then over time, as we learned how to support individual students, we started also learning how to broaden that out in order to be able to offer resources to larger number of students, and then formally introduced an area of BPI that works with students while they're still incarcerated, and then another office that works with students after they come home. So what that looks like is, while students are in prison, at the very outset, there's a reentry orientation to introduce them to what the college does and does not do in reentry. And then there's ongoing advising, group advising, one-on-one advising that particularly steps up as people get closer to release. Once students are in the last year and a half before they're going to leave prison, they're eligible to take reentry workshops. We also have publications available that are updated every year that provide some really practical guidance on leaving prison and everything that you might be setting up in your first year home, and also on continuing your college education. Once students leave prison, BPI offers a 6-week workshop that is an in-depth kind of both conversation about, but actually practically getting some of the work done in a lot of the areas that people are focused on when they first come home. So that's wellness, technology, practical things like bank accounts and IDs, things like career development, continuing education, housing, and it's broad, and it continues the support that is offered through that workshop then remains available in an ongoing way, one-on-one. Alumni are also connected in with a really vibrant alumni community who does a lot of the work of supporting one another. However, this is not where you would start with a college in prison program. So the thing I really want to emphasize is that the responsibility of the college should be thinking about the student's academic trajectory and how they're going to complete a degree. And that may happen while they're still incarcerated, or it may happen after they return home. So planning out ahead of time how to communicate with students, provide resources to students about those educational opportunities is really the highest priority when you're first getting started. So I think about 70 BPI students have enrolled with BARD post-release, some on the Annandale campus where I'm sitting, some in New York City. And then in addition to that number of students, there are a lot of people who go home to places outside of New York and wouldn't be able to attend BARD. We have had students transfer and continue on to degrees at dozens of other colleges and universities. So we also work with them on what that application process looks like, supporting them through processes like getting their access to their transfer credits, and making sure that there's more than one path available to anybody who's looking to finish that degree. And you know, it's the best part of all of this is that, of course, when alumni start joining the college faculty and administration, which is now the case at BARD, and is something to look forward to at whatever stage you're at with your own program. So that was a little bit of an overview of where we are, and I can go to the next slide. In terms of the PEP process, I'll just mention that BARD is actually still in the process of becoming a PEP. We are not a PEP yet. We were involved in the advocacy for returning Pell eligibility to people in prison. BPI alumni in particular were very effective as part of that advocacy project. We were participants in Second Chance Pell, so we have been drawing Pell for the past number of years, and we're in the process of applying for PEP status. We also work really closely with a number of other colleges and universities across the country and some internationally to try to create a community of practice where we're sharing experience and technical assistance and support. This happens in an ongoing way. I think that we've figured out that we have been in communication with or provided technical assistance or some kind of support to programs in 41 different states. But then each summer, we also host a 2-week summer residency when about 30 people join us each year for 2 weeks really go deeply into the things I've just rushed through, as well as other things I haven't mentioned, like fundraising, for example. So if this is something that you're interested in or you'd like to be connected to this larger community, the contact email is here on the screen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Megan. That was awesome information. So I wanted to kick off by a celebration, essentially. You know, it's thanks to everyone's great work in the higher education in prison ecosystem and with bipartisan support that Pell Grants to people who are incarcerated and people serving a criminal conviction were reinstated on July 1st of 2023. So kudos to everyone for this awesome work. Next slide, please. So Pell reinstatement was possible in part to the success of the Second Chance Pell experiment that saw over 200 colleges, including Bard College, as Megan just mentioned, offering degree programs via Pell Grants to people who were incarcerated in 48 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. So very impressive from what you can see from Second Chance Pell from 2016 to 2021. We're now in the process of Second Chance Pell revised experiment that a number of colleges are in, and this going to the PEP. Next slide, please. So the Pell Grant regulations offer more protections in place for this important population, which I will briefly cover here today. Next slide. So come the 1st of July, 2026, there will essentially be two types of institutions in the college in prison space. As you see here, we've got approved PEPs, and then we've got new or existing programs that do not use Pell. The reason that I mentioned July 1st of 2026 is currently there's a number of, it's approximately 160 of the Second Chance Pell colleges that have opted to join the revised experiment, and they have up to a 3-year window to actually transition to become a PEP. So that's why I've got that date there of July 1st. So come July 1st, 2026, if a college is doing college in prison, they're either going to be doing it with Pell Grants as part of the PEP, or they're going to be doing it with non-Pell Grants, so philanthropic funds or things of that nature. Next slide, please. So if a college wants to offer an approved PEP, please note the following that I have listed here. So again, the uppercase PEP, currently right now, there is no PEP running in the United States. And that is, again, a designation provided by the US Department of Education for colleges. There's been 14 that have been approved, but those colleges have not yet started running as a PEP. They might be currently running as a, philanthropically based or as Second Chance Pell revised experiment, but none of them have actually started a new program underneath the PEP designation. But if you do want to offer Pell Grants, you must apply to get that designation as a PEP. And then also to note here that any person who is incarcerated and serving a criminal conviction, regardless of sentence length or conviction type, is conceivably eligible for Pell Grants. Just a note, earlier I heard Megan talk about the jails there as well. Many of you probably know that if someone is currently located within a jail, but they haven't yet been sentenced, for example, then those individuals can actually draw down traditional Pell, because it's only once you're incarcerated and serving a criminal conviction that you must go through the Pell Grants where a college has been approved by a PEP. So just that little nuance that I wanted to mention there too. Next slide, please. So if a college does decide that you want to go that PEP route and get approval to administer Pell Grants to people who are incarcerated and serving a criminal conviction, you must go through a multiple approval process. So just briefly, I won't get into the weeds here, but just briefly, the college must connect with an oversight entity. In this case, it might be the Department of Corrections, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the Department of Defense for a military brig, for example. You must communicate with them, have a conversation, talk with them about what you're interested in possibly offering, students at that carceral location. You will have the oversight entity, they will have an application that you must complete for them because they want to, and that's regardless of if you're a Second Chance Pell or not. It's a PEP specific application that you will need to complete with that oversight entity, which will talk about, what kind of programs you want to offer, what kind of services, what kind of commitments that you have to students. Many of the things that Megan already mentioned, those will be questions there that you have to complete. So assuming that you receive approval from the oversight entity, then if your institution is located in a state where the State Higher Education Office, otherwise known as a SHIO, but they sometimes have other names like Board of Regents or things of that nature, if you if your institution needs to seek approval from them, like you do for other new programs, you will also have to go through them and make sure that they are approving you as a PEP as well. In some states, you won't have to do that, but you know, your administration will know whether or not you need to do that. So kind of keep that in mind. The next step, and remember, all of these must go in this sequence. You can't jump around with where you want to go. You've got to go in this order, is the accreditor. So obviously here we're talking about middle states. They have a substantive change, additional location, PEP specific process that they will want you to go through. So you will talk with them and you'll, you know, complete all that paperwork for them. And assuming that they approve your PEP in the paperwork side of things, then you will bring all these pieces of information, all these approvals from all these other entities, and complete a U.S. Department of Education PEP application that you'll do for them as well. So it's a multiple process. There's no magic number of how long this takes. Every piece of this approval process, they have their own time that they're going to take to move through with that. So that's the kind of approval steps that you'll need to take to hopefully finally get the thumbs up from the U.S. Department of Education that your institution has been approved to offer a PEP. Next slide, please. So then, assuming that your institution has been approved all the way up through and including the U.S. Department of Education, then your PEP is going to launch. Again, if you've been doing philanthropic funded programs or Second Chance Pell programs in the past, that's great. They were all awesome, but now you're officially starting as this PEP. So you launch your official PEP. Then middle states will complete their site visit of your PEP. Usually the regulation state within the first 12 months or as soon as practicable, you know, by the accreditor. So the middle states will do their site visit of your PEP specific a program, and then the oversight entity will be sharing data with the college because that's part of that program as designed with the regulations. And then at the end of 2 years of the PEP functioning, the oversight entity, again, corrections, will complete what is known as a best interest determination. Next slide, please. The final slide that I wanted to share with you is this one here, which is the best interest determination. So in the regulatory language for all PEPs, there are 4 musts that colleges must be seen as actually meeting these determinations. And again, the oversight entity and the college are going to determine, you know, how you're going to assess these in advance of this actually happening at the 2-year mark. But then just briefly, that there must be comparable experience, credentials, and turnover of faculty, that there are comparable transferability of credits for students who, you know, are in a carceral setting, just as the students on the outside can get transferability of credits, comparable academic and career advising while incarcerated and in advance of reentry. And Megan did an awesome job of explaining what they're doing at Bard, which really touches on a lot of these things already, which is wonderful. And then lastly, the ability for students to continue their education at any location of the college post-release. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind. So if your college doesn't want to draw down Pell Grants, remember, you'll be one of that other circle that you'll just continue to use philanthropic funds and you don't have to worry about these approval processes or anything like that. But if your institution wants to trigger Pell Grants for the people who are incarcerated, again, you must become a PEP, and those slides with the approval process, the post-approval process where you're starting your PEP, you're getting the site visit, and the best interest determination will have to kick into place. That's kind of the requirements of that. So I'm going to stop here now, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stan. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's again a pleasure to be here with you. You can advance to the next slide, please. So I wanted to start off with telling you a little bit about who I am and the organization that I represent and what brought me to this space today. What brings me mostly to this space is my identification as a formerly incarcerated person I am a formerly incarcerated person who was sentenced to 10 years in prison as a prior and persistent career criminal. I had a prosecutor actually pushing for 20 years to life in prison because she felt that I had no hope for changing the decisions that I had been making up until that time in my early 20s. Fast forward some time, I did my time, and I'm now Dr. Stan Andrees, endocrine scientist and assistant professor at Howard University College of Medicine. I'm actually here in my lab at Howard University in the middle of an experiment. In addition to being at Howard University, I also hold a visiting faculty affiliation with Georgetown Medicine. I was previously at Johns Hopkins Medicine for some time. Also took my talents across seas and was at a place called Imperial College London. So I clearly didn't live up to those expectations that that prosecutor had set those many years ago. And along this journey, about 7 years ago, I co-founded an organization called From Prison Cells to PhD with the idea and intent and goal and mission to help currently and formerly incarcerated men and women pursue higher education. So we've built what many people call a playbook or a blueprint to kind of help people navigate through the challenges of returning to the community and trying to put their lives back together. But in addition to knowing that, in addition to from the very start, wanting to provide direct services to help individuals navigate through the challenges of reentry, we knew that there were barriers in place that as we were helping people, swerve through and get around the hurdles, we knew that the hurdles didn't even need to be there in the first place. So we very intentionally started off the organization with the intent on doing policy work. And one of the big things that was one of the policy efforts that was, one of our main things when we first started and continues to be is access to higher education. And for us, that meant, going very intentionally aiming at reinstating Pell. Of course, 7 years ago, when we first started when our organization was founded in 2017, that was right after, as our two previous presenters were just mentioning and talked a little bit about Second Chance Pell. So, Second Chance Pell came around, but Pell obviously wasn't fully back. And so Pell had been out, not available to incarcerated individuals for the most part for about 25 years. And that was one of the big things that we started working on. And one of the things that, and this is, of course, we stepped into this in 2017. There are many advocates before us that had been around since it was removed from in 1994 after the Clinton crime bill, which did a lot of harmful things to our community in terms of the criminal legal system. Removing Pell is one of the things that it did. And so there had been advocates that were directly impacted around from the very start. But what we like to say that we brought to the table, we ended up co-founding an entity called Unlock Higher Education. And through Unlock Higher Education, that entity seeks to elevate the voices of currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals in the space of education justice. And we were able to partner with a number of correctional associations, the Correctional Leaders Association being one of them, to really kind of show policymakers that both people that are confined inside correctional institutions and people that are leading these correctional institutions, we all want the same thing, and that is to educate individuals who are behind the walls. We know both corrections and people who are directly impacted know that by providing that education, it's better for everyone. It's better for our communities. It's better for the individual. It's better for the people's families. And so we dove headfirst into that space. And of course, as the previous presenters mentioned, Pell, we moved to this place where we really think that one of the deciding things that tipped us over the edge into getting Pell reinstated was really elevating our voices and bringing the voices of currently and formerly incarcerated people into that conversation. So, Pell gets passed in late 2020 in the midst of COVID-19 and this pandemic. And they moved to putting together a negotiated rulemaking committee, which is an entity that they call NEGREG that helps decide what is the actual language of the bill. And again, through our advocacy of really making sure that our voices are represented, it was stated by legislation that members from formerly incarcerated communities should be on this committee. So I was selected as the person to represent organizations that work with and for directly impacted people and formerly incarcerated students. And so I sat on the negotiated rulemaking committee as a voting member, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. I'll also just quickly mention, I have some QR codes on each of the slides to jump into some of the content that I'm talking about. So here is a slide if you want to, a QR code if you want to get connected to Unlock Higher Ed, as well as speakers that can speak to the topics that Unlock Higher Ed advocates for. Next slide, please. So again, this is another QR code for Unlock Higher Ed if you want to get involved. And much of what I hope to talk about on this slide, I've kind of already talked about in the previous slide, in that P2P was very intentional about having our voices be heard in the process of education justice. And so we were part of this NEGREG process, and it was mentioned by Belinda just a moment ago about the entity that is involved in accepting prison education programs. And we spent a lot of time on this in the negotiated rulemaking process, in the NEGREG process, on making sure that they require that the process or that they include in the language that the process should involve incarcerated individuals and formerly incarcerated individuals and organizations that represent those individuals. So as part of the process, the directly impacted people are asked to be part of that selection process. And it was not necessarily that there was any disagreement that should be the case, but that was, one of the arguments and one of the positions that I brought to the NEGREG process. Next slide, please. If we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And so I want to talk a little bit about the NEGREG process itself. So I, am now a member of this advisory committee in the state of Maryland and Missouri. So as I mentioned, I'm the executive director of Prison Cells of PhD. We operate in a number of correctional facilities across the country. Maryland and Missouri are two of the states that we operate our program, the Prison to Professional Scholars Program, or P2P Scholars Program, inside Maryland and Missouri correctional facilities. So we have relationships with those two correctional entities. So we were asked to be on the advisory committee of both the Maryland and Missouri PEP advisory committees. And so I wanted to speak a little bit about that process. So as Belinda had mentioned, I am not aware either that any of the entities that are making decisions of accepting PEPs across the country and in various states have put a designated time limit or a time frame on how long it takes to complete the process, but what Maryland has provided and made available a guidance into the steps of what it takes. And I think that has been very helpful for the different entities that have applied. And being involved in both the Maryland and the Missouri process, there has been there's been a good number of applicants, colleges and universities applying in both Maryland and Missouri. Maryland, I think there is a slight bit more. This particular picture that I'm showing is the Secretary of Corrections in Maryland, Secretary Scruggs, at a press conference announcing this kind of groundbreaking. I think they were Maryland University System, which I have the link there, but I forget. There are somewhere around 12 to 18. I should know that number, but the entire Maryland University System has submitted to be a prison education program. So every single one of the campuses in the university system in Maryland is on their way to having a prison education program. And I know, working with Maryland has intentions of having, prison education programs be available in every single one of their correctional facilities. And this here basically will, be one of the ways that will allow them, as the Maryland system is, they have colleges in every corner of the state. So I think the fact that Maryland had this guide placed very early, and they engaged the stakeholders very early to put together this guide that they made public. And I think, that may have been part of the reason that, the Maryland system stepped up so quickly to become the first system in the country to apply for that particular status. In terms of my role in this, and, we actually have a couple of people on P2P that are involved within both states on this committee. And, for us, we feel that our role, of course, we review the entire applications that come in, but we pay a special attention to what type of supportive services are being included within these applications. We know, and as mentioned earlier in the first presentation, BARD has been very successful at where they are, and I think she mentioned it very put it very nicely on, you don't just start out and you're a BARD or BPI, but you can build towards that. And one of the things that you need to be building towards is these supportive services that are available in programs like BPI. And for us, we know that everyone can't just pop into the game and be BPI. And so what we suggest, and this is what this process has been very helpful for, is that we say you don't have to provide these supportive services on your own in-house. You can partner. We actually suggest that you partner with community organizations, that this is the primary thing that they do, is provide these types of reentry and supportive services to people that are currently and formerly incarcerated to pursue education and employment. And so just connect with those entities to help do those types of services, which should be included in, a very successful PEP program. And so next slide, please. Just really one more plug to P2P. So we provide those types of reentry and supportive services that I was just mentioning. We provide wraparound services in the form of putting a network around an individual. We call the individuals that we work with scholars. So the scholar is connected to a tutor and mentor that meets with them weekly for at least 1 to 2 hours per week. Then they have access to a number of other support in terms of resource specialists that can help them get IDs or help them connect to social services, as well as connecting them to the national network of individuals that we are connected to. And if interested, you can scan the QR code to learn more about how to connect with us, as we have a footprint in over 35 states in the country. Next slide, please. And lastly, I just want to encourage you, if interested, to pick up a copy of my book. I recently published a book, From Prison Cells to PhD, It's Never Too Late to Do Good. Although this is a memoir about my journey, it's not really about me. It's really more about the social, cultural, political, societal things that go on for an individual like myself who is from the Ferguson, Missouri area, got involved in selling drugs at an early age, moved into the criminal legal system at just 15, and progressed on to sitting in front of that judge looking at 20 years to life in my early 20s. So it's really about the things that go on that a person like myself from a place like the Ferguson, Missouri area goes through, the things that end up having them go to prison, and what it looks like for our society to think about, supporting a person to get them back on the path to be a productive member of our community. And with that, I will pass it off to
Carmela.
our MS. Yes.
Thank you, Stanley. So you will see here are some helpful commission resources. You will receive a copy of these slides via email within a week, but we have also included these links in the chat for you today. For specific questions related to your institution, please reach out to your institution's appointed commission staff liaison. Excellent, thank you. Questions can be submitted through the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. And we will be accepting questions, and we have a few in the queue. First question. Many states categorically prohibit the use of technology in prison teaching. Obviously, this impacts contemporary teaching and learning provisions and outcomes. Can you comment on existing program contingencies? I don't know, Megan, I'm not sure if you're.
Sure, be happy to jump in to get us started. So that is a stricter situation than we have in New York. But in New York, you can have technology, but there's no internet. And we have no technology in the classrooms. Although we have a computer lab in the classrooms, there's zero technology. So I think we have some experience with this. I think that it affects certain subject areas more than others, of course. But what I do, since I started teaching back when we didn't have smart classrooms, I like to talk with faculty about kind of thinking about the classrooms in that way. So you can really teach most subject areas just fine without technology. You don't really need the PowerPoint presentation if you plan ahead. So we emphasize planning ahead, thinking ahead of time about all the readings that you'd like students to have access to, what books you want them to have, and then you structure your class as a discussion-based seminar where people come in with the books and their notebooks, and they sit down and they have a conversation about what they've read and about the course concepts. To me, this didn't feel like too much of an adaptation because that's how I started teaching. And so I think most faculty can get there. There are, of course, classes that completely rely on technology. And so that would be something that you'd have to work through. We have, for example, for art history classes that would really need to be able to see slides typically. We've worked really hard to try to figure out how to create color photocopies that are good enough quality that they can be used in class. For classes that would typically require wet labs. We found replacement for those. Some of the study that would be done in the lab can be done theoretically in a biology class. So that's not a complete answer. You can't teach everything if you don't have any technology, but I think it shouldn't prevent you from starting.
Thank you, Belinda or Stanley. Did you?
I'm happy to add just a little bit more flavor to this too. After what Megan had shared with Vera on the national level, prior to COVID, we saw most state Department of Corrections were not doing any technology. And one of the few benefits that we have seen of COVID, if I dare say that, is actually that a lot more state Department of Corrections are heavily evolving and ramping up technology availability. There's a lot that obviously internet specific access is not available, but we're seeing a lot more Department of Corrections whitelist sites, or they're allowing the colleges to have a learning management system that is vetted on the Department of Corrections side, at a certain time of the day, with information going in from the college, and then it gets vetted before it gets released to students, and then vice versa. Students will do stuff on a learning management system, usually in a supplemental role, like, they're doing face-to-face classes, but then some of those assignments are going on the learning management system. It gets vetted and then gets shipped back to the, to the college that way. So we are seeing some advancements. I know, one of the portfolios I manage at Vera is the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And we've got a number of colleges, 10 colleges that were providing degree programs to people who are incarcerated via Second Chance Pell. And all federal prisons, for the most part, don't have access to technology. It's something that they are working in a pipeline to try to make sure that there's more technology access for students who happen to be incarcerated in a Federal Bureau of Prisons too. So again, we're seeing advancements take place, but I love how Megan was able to kind of talk about, those things that BARD and, some of those other college partners that BARD works with their consortium or community of practice is doing. So it's still, a work in progress, but, I do believe that all corrections agencies, federal, military, and states really are trying to, within reason, work more hand in hand with their college partners to get that availability. So there's hope there, hopefully.
And I would just add one piece to that. The Digital Equity Act will, I think, make a lot of change in that area too. There's been dollars allocated to correctional entities to improve digital equity. So I imagine that, I know that in Maryland, for instance, in Maryland and Missouri, they're working to address that exact question. And also to the learning management platform, platforms such as Adobo are a tool that has, it's not the internet, but it has so much information on it that, it's a good supplement to learning, as Belinda mentioned.
Yeah, thanks so much for mentioning that Digital Equity Act, Stan. And if others on the, with the webinar, if you haven't already connected, every state has a digital equity office where they are, parceling out funds in the first round, but they're also planning on doing a second round and maybe even a third round of funding. So please connect, whether it's the college or whether it's corrections, work together as part of this ecosystem to get those funds, because they are available and it's billions of dollars.
Thank you. And I think this next question is kind of connected. And maybe Stanley, you can help with this one. It's about equipment logistics, and they're under-resourced. What are some workarounds for things like lab equipment, calculators, etc.? And they do not have Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I can jump in first, but I think also offer the space to my colleagues here too. I would be remiss. This gives me a good tool. I didn't mention a project called STEM Ops. So STEM Opportunities in Prison Settings is a project that's funded by the National Science Foundation, P2P, and several other partners, Princeton University's Prison Teaching Initiative, Vanderbilt's Race, Research, and Justice, Education Development Center, and Operation Restoration are the recipients. And so this initiative really came about to try to broaden participation in STEM amongst currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, knowing that, many of the existing prison education programs did not include STEM, although, Megan just mentioned some creative ways to get around and offering biology courses. So there's a lot more programs that are thinking about this and how to be creative around, technology, courses that require technology, courses that require wet labs. And so there's a lot more people that are becoming expert at this, but I would encourage you, Princeton and Princeton's teaching initiative, as well as NJ Step and as well as Bard. I think some of the experts in this game have found ways to figure that out. Princeton, through the STEM Ops initiative, PTI has put together toolkits on how to offer certain courses that are STEM related, that have wet labs that are sometimes complicated. So I would defer to reaching out to them, and they're creating tools to help individuals and PEPs understand how to offer those types of programs. And I can drop those resources in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll also jump in there too. I think for the most part, with again what Vera's seen on the national level, if the colleges are talking more with their corrections partner about the needs and the requirements, and I think this gets back a little bit to the PEP regulations and some of these benefits when it comes to protections for students, is, for example, I think calculators was something that was mentioned, again, talking with the college talking with corrections and being like, look, we're Middle States accredited institution for certain classes, such as calculus, for example. The students need access to calculators. It's a requirement as part of our accreditation, for example. That's just a very loose example. I don't know if that would fly specifically, but I hope you understand what I'm saying here. But by communicating that to the education specialist at corrections, and them understanding the true need and how there's certain, requirements for it, we have seen in places like, for example, the Holy Cross College at Notre Dame, which I know Bard partners with them, where they've been able to get some labs and calculators and some things into a facility, in Indiana. And, it might be restricted access. It might be that those students only get the calculators when they're literally in the classroom and they're able to use them, and then they have to get put into a secure location afterwards. But again, I think the open lines of communication between the college and the oversight entities, we have seen a lot of advancements. Yes, there's going to be times where it's a hard no, and you just have to, work around or find other funding, as Stanley had mentioned. But, that open communication can really go a long way.
Thank you. And we do have a question about graduate education. And of course, they're not eligible for a Pell. But if these, were you going to say something, Belinda?
Yeah, I can actually take that one if you want, Camilla.
Okay.
Yeah. So do we still need any of the PEP process? Again, remember, for the uppercase PEP, that is Pell specific funding. So if it's a graduate program and vis-a-vis you're not using Pell, then no, you don't have to use the PEP regulations. Again, it's when you're wanting to draw down Pell grants for students that the PEP requirements then become mandatory. If you're using philanthropic funds for graduate or some other, way of funding that graduate program, PEP regulations do not trigger, if that makes sense.
And if I could add to that, being part of the advisory committee for Maryland, for instance, although it doesn't require that same process, it may be some of the same people at the correctional institution level that review and provide guidance on, because it's still a partnership that you have with corrections. And so some of the same people will be reviewing and using some of the same thought process to make sure that it's a quality program.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Stan. If people remember that that arrows that I had with, oversight entity, then the state higher education office, then accreditation, and then the Department of Education, definitely that Department of Education application doesn't need to be completed. But as Stan mentioned, some corrections agencies around the country, regardless of how you're funding their program, program, they're still wanting you to go through a review process. So it may not be specifically a PEP application. It may just be a college in prison application, so to speak. So, as Stan said, they may still be like, we want to make sure you're doing this, this, and this, regardless of your of where those funds are coming from. So that's a good thing to mention.
And I'll just add, in terms of the middle states process, if the correctional facility is considered an additional location, and if you plan to offer 50% or more of the program at the site, we consider that an additional location. So you would still have to go through our substantive change process. And if you have any questions about that, you can, of course, reach out to the middle state staff. And we do have a question about funding, and I guess this kind of goes back to what we spoke to, but maybe we can help and offer additional help. The costs associated with beginning a prison program. Okay, what suggestions would you offer for a medium-sized private college wishing to offer prison education in terms of funding? Thanks.
So I think that this would be hard to get into too much detail on the webinar, but BARD has applied for a number of institutional grants, and we work with other colleges to help them identify grant opportunities for themselves. And I think that that's usually how people get started. You do need to have funding to start beyond what you'll be able to draw through Pell if you're just starting brand new. And I would also say that I recommend thinking broadly in that way, even if you're successful in becoming a PEP. Pell is not going to cover all of your expenses. So you need to be thinking about how to create a sustainable program that will outlast the kind of trends in governance and criminal justice, and so that you'll be able to commit to your students in a long-term way.
If I could add to that, and Megan, maybe you could comment on this. I mean, it also takes a level of institutional commitment and funds. I think there needs to be, one being, I think it was mentioned the private institution. Did you mention a private? So, thinking about tuition is also a big part of the funding conversation about, a reduced tuition for this particular population. Many higher education institutions have programs already in place that are for certain communities that have lower tuition. So, trying to think about using that type of model. And I don't know if that's, something that Megan or Belinda, you want to comment on, but in addition to also looking for outside support, I think there needs to be that institutional support as well.
Yeah, I agree. I know that a number of accreditors around the country, and it may very well be with middle states too, as part of the substantive change additional location for a PEP, they might also do this just for regular sub change that's not PEP. They'll actually ask for a budget. They'll actually, ask to see, how the institution is funding, the proposed PEP and things of that nature too. And that really gives the college a chance as they're working on their application to be like, yes, how are we actually going to fund this? If, what monies are coming in from the institution. Are they in kind? Are they not in kind? What grants are we getting in? And things of that nature too. And then just as Megan had mentioned earlier, if you're thinking of starting a new program, you can simply Google, philanthropic organizations, college in prison, and you'll see a bunch. And there's more philanthropic organizations that seem to, with the advancements of Pell Grant reinstatement, I think there's a lot more excitement about offering, different different funding streams available for these programs. So, but another thing I just mentioned too is, you know, for colleges, just like you would with your traditional programs, you know, with alumni, with employers in the region, you know, you can think outside the box like you do with some of your other on-campus programs to be like, you know, are there employers that would be interested in, you know, funding some of this work? You know, if we're going to provide a wonderful group of engaged scholars who get great degrees and are really passionate about this work, wouldn't they make great employees in the future? So, you know, if you're offering this great pipeline, you know, for these wonderful people once they're released, or even perhaps while they're still incarcerated, to be employed by these employers, you know, that's another way to think about, you know, funding streams and that as well.
Thank you. What challenges do institutions commonly face when developing a PEP, and how can MHAC or other state services provide targeted support to address these difficulties?
Is MHEC the excuse me, Maryland Higher Education?
Yes.
Yep. So I know that so with state agencies like with the SHIO, they actually created a report that listed a number of different ways that different SHIOs around the country can actually support college and prison programs. So that could be a resource I could share with Carmela. That 2020 report, it came out that I think there were 9 recommendations, and the first one was get Pell Grants reinstated. So luckily that one's already done, but all the other ones are, you know, different ways that MHEC and other government agencies can kind of help with these programs. I will say, as someone who started a program at an institution in South Carolina, one of the biggest challenges we faced was just opening up really strong, positive connections with corrections. You know, we were one of the first, we were not the first, but one of the first second chance Pell colleges in our state in South Carolina, and just creating that trust, you know, between the entities, and that I think that really went a long way, so that, you know, even now that I'm not even directing that program, that college is doing really well with the Department of Corrections, because, you know, everyone came together, and, you know, it's that trust that has really helped mitigate some of those other challenges like COVID or, you know, technology or things of that nature. But please, I'll pass it over to Megan and Stan.
Well, I think that going back to the idea that I led with, that I think the goal here should be to support colleges and universities to bring their own college, their own university to life in this new institutional context. Anything that can be done to support that, as opposed to creating a system where there's kind of one internally homogeneous system within the prisons that isn't linked to any specific college, or and one of the reasons why I think this is really important is that it's really important for colleges, for students, not just to get credits, but to have the identity of the college and to see themselves as full members of that institution. And so we need to be setting things up to encourage institutions to invest in that way. And I think that if there are state systems, there's a lot of opportunity to support that, as opposed to creating systems where colleges kind of have to just feed into a generic system. That generic system will over time be a separate system, and I don't imagine that it will be as strong as college and prison outside of prison. Another thing I would suggest is that we be very careful about overbuilding bureaucracy in this moment. There's a huge ramp up of bureaucratic processes that some of which we've just been talking about. This in and of itself is an enormous burden to colleges and universities. We don't want to prevent people from doing this work because we are so busy building bureaucracy. So anything that can be done to actually pull back on that a little bit is incredibly helpful. And then I think I would say also, you know, supporting Stan described reentry organizations, work that's being done particularly by formerly incarcerated impacted people to support people coming home from prison. colleges don't necessarily have that expertise, and it's great if colleges can partner with those organizations, but if those organizations can also receive funding from state institutions so that the colleges are not footing the bill for that, it makes it a lot easier for colleges to do what they know how to do really well, and for the students who are returning home from college to get the support they need.
Thank you. We do have a question about the Middle States substantive change process. And the next deadlines for applications are November 1 and January, and then the next after that is January 1st. After the submission, if your application is considered materially complete and after the review of our peer evaluators, that process may take up to 2 months. So if you submit on November 1 and everything is, and the reviewers approve your report, you should have a decision by mid-December for that. No, actually in January because of the holiday. For the November 1 submissions, you may not see a decision until January. And then look like there's another question about the visit, the substantive change process. I just discussed the process. The visit will take place and we would work in conjunction with the institution and the correctional facility. Like we would work and try to find out, we will have to find a peer evaluator to visit the site. We would work with the institution and the oversight entity to determine if that peer evaluator is fit for that to do the visit. And the site visit will be, I guess, the same as any other additional location visit, except it's to a correctional facility. And of course, there are some guidelines that we would have to adhere to based on that correctional facility, where we would have to meet with the students and speak to the correctional and the oversight entity during the visit. So it's similar to an additional location site visit, except there would be some, I'm sure, differences because it's at a correctional facility. And Belinda, you had a look on your face. I don't know if you wanted to add something. No. Okay, thank you. Let's see. And we have a question here. How do you improve the relation between the Department of Correction and outside agency for post-incarceration success? I'm not sure if that's it.
Does anybody else want to start, or do you want me to jump in?
You can jump in. I'll add after.
Okay. I think relationship is the key word. So you are building hopefully a long-term relationship that requires investment over time. And I think that keeping that in mind is at the core. I think that there is significant overlap in the goals of people in Department of Corrections who want to support college. I also think that anyone who is working inside a prison system is going to encounter a lot of people with all different ideas about whether or not they should be doing this. And I would say that your job is not to convince them to see things the same way as you, but to run your college in a way that is professional and reliable, and so that everyone can see that you are not making their job harder, and that you are somebody who understands the responsibilities that you hold within that space. I would also say that you don't have to pretend to have the exact same views as the Department of Corrections. These are different institutions, and it's really important to actually be able to speak honestly about the distinction between a Department of Corrections and a college or university. There are different things that should be or shouldn't be the business of one or the other. So it's really important to hold the responsibility for academic decision makings within the college. It's also very important to recognize what things are not your business, and to make that clear to students, and to also make that clear in communication with the people you're working with in the prisons.
I mean, I really don't have much to add to that. I know we're running close to time.
Yeah, I think we may have time for one more question. Let me see if I can find lots of congratulations to Dr. Stanley. And this is just a comment. Okay. I don't see any more questions in the queue, just some comments.
Were there any from the pre-survey that we may want to touch on?
I think most of those questions were already in the PowerPoint. I did bring up a few already.
Carmela, I did see one about who typically directs prison education programs at
Yeah,
universities, my
okay,
friend. I'm
mhm.
happy to,
Yeah, well, sure, thank you.
yeah, I'm happy to jump into that one, and definitely happy for Megan and Stan to jump in as well. From my experience, I felt that being a tenured faculty member to start our program back at the time was really helpful. You certainly can have adjuncts. I'm not saying that an adjunct running a PEP program or college and prison program is a bad thing. I just think for support that faculty member is going to need to direct a program, I think potentially someone being tenured would be certainly helpful. It was personally for me. Another thing that I would like to really lift up too, and we're starting to see this more and more in this space, and I would personally, and I know Vera would personally love to see it too, is more formally impacted people running the college and prison programs. I think, I am not personally, I was never incarcerated, and I think that I think someone having that perspective, directing a program could be really valuable. So for Vera, we've seen across the country that these spaces are becoming more available, or if, someone who's formerly been incarcerated could be like a co-director or, an associate director, or getting employed by the institution in different ways for the college and prison programs, whether it's re-entry coordinators or navigators is a common term that's often used as well. I think the more that we can get, the voices of people who have the lived experience in this space, whether it's directing or otherwise, I think is really valuable. That's just my kind of 2 cents.
Yeah, and I can jump in. And I think the question was interesting. I think who typically, I don't know if that is who should typically or who is typically, wasn't really clear. But I think what you mentioned, Belinda, is true. Typically, who is typically at the moment happens to be faculty, and oftentimes tends to be tenured faculty. But when we think about that, particularly, I have to mention this, of course, myself. I mentioned I've been at Georgetown, Howard, Imperial, and I'm currently at Howard University College of Medicine, which is a historically Black college and university. I don't think I've mentioned this, but I always call it the Mecca of HBCUs. We're the #1 producer of Black and brown scientists and physicians. But, would be remiss to not mention to this conversation of when we think about the fact that it's usually tenured faculty in our country. Usually tenured faculty don't happen to be people that look like me in our country, and most institutions that are not historically Black institutions, so predominantly white or PWIs. So what typically is the case for who are program directors of PEPs in college and prison are typically white individuals. And, there tends sometimes to be more white female individuals in this space even. But for the very reason for what Belinda, what you mentioned is that, when you bring this conversation to the higher ups in your university, being a tenured faculty is helpful. And just by nature of where we're at in our country in terms of the academic institution as a whole, tenured people tend to be usually less people of color in that bracket, but that needs to change. So that, I mean, that needs to change of itself. There needs to be more people of color that are really, running and directing these programs. I think to represent, I mean, the prison population itself, we know is overly represented with people of color. And then to your point of it being directly impacted people, like, so we have to think about the two challenges that you just presented, that universities typically like to see, the conversation goes a little bit better when there's this tenured person, and they're not usually people of color, and they're definitely not usually people who are directly impacted. So how can we be intentional about changing that, knowing the challenge that I've just mentioned? And I think we really need to be thinking about that as a field of like college and prison. You know, as a field of academics, that's a whole bigger question of like why there's not so many Black and people of color in tenured positions. But it's something that we can be intentional about in this space. As particularly as we think about funding, and funders could play a role in this, in helping to be intentional about diversifying the leadership. But if that can't happen, as Belinda mentioned, there's ways you should be hiring like the associate or assistant director, or having directly impacted people in your team. And it's just a benefit to the program, as for many of the reasons that we've kind of touched on throughout our conversation.
And another way to understand that question is to think about where the position is located within the structure of the university. So I would just suggest that, and it actually, there are lots of examples of the college and prison program being located all differently within college and universities. But one thing that I would suggest is that if given the choice between locating your college and prison program within an office of the college that's understood as service learning or outreach for conventional students, or kind of community projects, versus an academic office, like for example, the provost's office, I would suggest going with the provost's office, or in some other way, making it very, very clear that this is an academic degree program. And then whoever is in that leadership role will have the support of the college to be able to make the decisions that they need to make in order to grow this over time, and in order to ensure that students have access and priority focus of the college.
Thank you both for that. I'm actually also going to give a shout out for FICGN. We haven't mentioned them yet. The formerly Incarcerated College Graduates Network. They actually just recently released a call for higher education and prison orientation, where they're trying to build capacity. So higher education and prison orientation for faculty and staff. So I'm going to put the link in that to give that to Middle State, so that they might share this with you all, because I think that would be another excellent resource for this as well.
Thank you. And it looks like we're close to time. So, but before we conclude, we can go to the next slide. On behalf of the commission, I want to give a huge thank you to our team of panelists for their continued contributions and for their work today. Also, please join us December 11th through the 13th at the Philadelphia Marriott downtown for the Middle States Commission on Higher Education 2024 Annual Conference. Registration is open now at msche.org, and we hope to see you there. Once again, we'd like to thank Cyberbit, who has sponsored this event. Cyberbit is a 2024 Annual Conference Platinum sponsor, and will share more about their services and presentation at the exhibit hall during this year's annual conference in December. We appreciate their support, and to learn more about their services, please visit cyberbit.com. And again, thank you for attending today's event, and to learn about future events, please visit msche.org and follow us at msche.org on YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Have a great day. Thank you.